Hey guys, my name is Jamie, and let's break down some walls. Now before I start this video, I'd like to properly introduce a new segment to my YouTube channel called The Golden Age. I decided to call it this because I believe that our generation is quite possibly seeing the best of TV yet, and we've got shows like The Sopranos and The Wire to thank. That's not to say that there are no good shows before, it's just that nowadays there's such a wide range of artsy shows that it's hard to keep track. And I think the reason these shows are so good is that they take risks that we don't really see in the film industry, and I think that's largely thanks to trailblazers like The Sopranos and The Wire. Now don't get me wrong, I still love the cinema experience of watching things on the big screen, but when you compare that to the options available at home, you got to say that series are winning the battle. And that's because of the approaches that are taken within both formats. In the film industry, there's a particular focus on franchises, whether it's a reboot or a sequel. TV shows, on the other hand, seem to strive for original ideas. Even if the idea for a series itself isn't that original, I believe that it would perform better as a series than as a film, and that's because of the format itself. Series on average nowadays are around 10 to 12 episodes long, so you got around 12 hours, whereas a film is going to be anything between 2 and 3 hours. Therefore, with a series, you have more time to develop characters and to explore all areas of a story, so you have a much more successful payoff by the end of the story. That's why I think that when we look back on the art that was created in the first 2 decades of the 21st century, it will be the series that will be remembered more fondly.
You're goddamn right.
It's because of high-quality TV shows like House of Cards that you might as well call the Golden Age the Netflix era. In fact, David Fincher himself, who is an occasional director and one of the executive producers of House of Cards, said that the reason he wanted to work in TV was because that there is better quality writing for actors, that there is more complex characterizations, and because of its long-form nature. From the very first scene, we know that Frank Underwood is somebody who doesn't mess around. Whether it's putting a dog out of its misery or killing somebody for his convenience, we learn very quickly that he'll stop at nothing to achieve what he wants, which is primarily power, but also revenge when he's snubbed as Secretary of State. By the end of Season 4, Frank Underwood is campaigning as both the current president and Democrat candidate alongside Claire after settling tensions and conflicts between them. The challenges they are to face in Season 5 is to beat the increasingly popular Republican candidate Conway in the election, to overcome the outrage caused by Tom Hammerschmidt's article about Frank's corruption, and also the threat of terrorism, particularly due to homegrown terrorists killing an American man on American soil. To do this, they develop a strategy of fear.
We don't submit to terror. We make the terror.
Well, I wonder where I've seen that before.
A world where freedom itself is under attack.
We're up against an enemy that celebrates death and totally worships destruction. You've seen that.
Yep, that's American politics in a nutshell. As stated earlier, the main obstacle in Season 5 for the Underwoods is the Republican candidate, Conway. And the Underwoods, as we have come to know about them, will resort to any means possible to beat their opponents. In this season, it includes fake terrorism in line with their fear policy. However, this doesn't really seem to be enough because Frank is such an unpopular figure. But very much like the actual 2016 election, it took some twists and turns. As a result of this, Frank wins the election, but by the time he does, all his problems have multiplied. Since this is all occurring in the aftermath of Tom Hammerschmidt's article about Frank's alleged corruption, he is being increasingly scrutinized not only by Tom, but also by opportunistic politicians like Alex Romero. And it gets even worse because he's surrounded by people who know too much. This includes people like Jane Davis, Mark Usher, Tom Yates, etc. However, one of the biggest concerns for Frank is that there's a leak in his administration and it could be anybody. Oh well, never mind. Turns out that Frank was the leak because he knew he was going to go down anyway and he wanted to coordinate his downfall with Doug, who in turn takes the fall for Zoe's murder. However, Frank still needs Claire to pardon him. Instead, she sends her troops and criticizes his presidency. Did I see it coming? Yes, partly. Let me explain. Whether you're a seasoned fan of the show or just somebody who's aware of general pop culture, you'll surely know that the central theme of House of Cards is that of power. And that's why in practically every line of dialogue or any plot development in the scene, this is something that is reflected. Since the beginning, it's been the central character arc of both Frank and Claire Underwood, which has seen them rise from being an influential whip and the head of a charity to the first couple of the White House. And this is because both characters are very Machiavellian, Claire becoming more so than I had previously thought since season 3. In fact, in the past 2 seasons, the Machiavellian nature of both characters have shown the potential for conflict, which was why I expected another breakdown. And this was hinted at throughout the series, particularly with regards to sex. As countless political scandals have shown us, power and sex come hand in hand. This is something that is particularly true in the world of House of Cards and is even used effectively as a tool to show the dynamic between certain characters or to teach us something about a character themselves.
A great man once said that everything in life is about sex. Except sex. Sex is about power.
One significant thing I noticed about the sex scenes in season 5 was that in nearly every single one of them, women were on top. And this was used to embody an underlying notion that women were taking charge in the political world of House of Cards, and was also used as a symbolic foreshadowing for Claire's rise to the presidency. In fact, in Claire's very own sex scenes, she goes from being nearly raped at the beginning of season 5 to poisoning and watching Tom die while she's riding on top of him.
Damn! That's some fucked up shit!
It may have been a man's world before in House of Cards, but shortly after this season, with Claire's ascent to power, with new characters like Jane Davis having as much influence as they do, and other female characters in general talking about Claire's potential presidency, you can say that Beyoncé was probably right in saying girls run the world. At the risk of overanalyzing it and sounding like a high school English teacher, one of the reasons that I came to expect Claire rising to power at the expense of Frank was through foreshadowing in other scenes. For instance, in 2 particular moments, at one point Claire and Frank are fighting and are separated by the presidential desk, and at the other moment, Frank has back pain and he's left behind on the floor by Claire. What I didn't expect was for Claire to screw over Frank so soon and for it to start off with Frank's resignation as president. Practically all the characters in House of Cards are self-interested and Machiavellian and therefore are not opposed to screwing each other over, but none more so than the Underwoods. Particularly Frank Underwood, who is the master of the game in this show and is brought to life so well by Kevin Spacey. Aside from his phenomenal acting and diction, what makes Kevin Spacey's character so captivating is the way that he breaks the fourth wall. Frank Underwood is by no means a saint, and yet I find myself supporting him, and it's particularly because of these fourth wall breaks where we're drawn in on his side and become his co-conspirators.
It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what I do, just as long as I'm doing something. You're happy to be along for the ride. And frankly, I don't blame you. With all the foolishness and indecision in your lives, why not a man like me? I don't apologize. In the end, I don't care whether you love me or you hate me, just as long as I win. The deck is stacked. The rules are rigged. Welcome to the death of the age of reason.
In fact, it's very similar to the way Shakespeare used asides in plays, particularly in King Lear, a play that they even directly reference in this season of House of Cards.
History has a way of looking better than it was. Or perhaps Shakespeare was right. We're all just madmen leading the blind.
In fact, I'd go as far as to say that Frank Underwood is really just a modernized American Edmund who is seeking a legacy after being publicly humiliated. Similarly, the obvious comparison for Robin Wright's character is another Shakespearean character, Lady Macbeth. However, Claire Underwood goes further than Lady Macbeth because she takes her own future into her own hands directly. One of the most famous lines of Lady Macbeth is in a soliloquy where she associates femininity with weakness. If the creators of House of Cards had been as influenced by Shakespeare as I think they may have been, then you could argue that Claire Underwood's short and elegant but boyish haircut, or the fact that she rejected, with Frank Underwood as well, a societal gender role of having children, they could be character traits that are very much in line with Lady Macbeth's soliloquy.
Do you regret it, not having children? Oh, I'm sorry, that's too personal. Do you ever regret having them?
However, what has been most important to Claire's development to a Machiavellian president was the fact that she progressively broke the fourth wall since the end of the fourth season and throughout the fifth season. One of the main reasons that House of Cards has made its mark in this golden age is that it has its own elegant style. House of Cards will always be associated with slow burn dialogue in shady or dark areas, which develops into fast-paced action with grave consequences. And it's the fact that all the directors who have come on, including Robin Wright herself, have stayed loyal to this style that it's been so effective. Everything from the music to the design production is used to emphasize on the power that's associated with Washington to achieve sufficient realism in portraying this power and to create the right atmosphere for the series. It's particularly the cinematography that achieves this so well because it resonates the themes that are found in Michael Dobbs' political thriller. What I really love with the cinematography is the tracking shots and the close-ups that are used in the sequences where Frank breaks the wall and gives us a tour of a scene with his own opinions. They are edited together so well and so smoothly that it really gives you the sense that Frank Underwood is in control. Another thing that's really great about House of Cards is how it stays relevant with the world that's around us. For instance, ISIS is redone as ICO in the series, or Putin becomes Petrov, etc. When it comes to House of Cards overall, there aren't many things to dislike. However, Season 5 definitely did not hit the standards of previous seasons. This can be explained by the fact that the usual showrunner Beau Willimon left the show before Season 5, which resulted in some pretty poor script writing. First of all, Conway ended up being beaten way too easily when it mattered. Frank gets the audio recording that ends the presidential race from a random supposed friend of Conway's who just shows up for that one episode to conveniently give it to him. And it was not made better by the fact that Frank remarked how convenient it was. That was just some lazy writing. I think it would have worked better, for instance, if it was Conway's wife who gave the audio file after a breakdown of their relationship due to his behavior which could be linked to his troubled military past. Speaking of which, why wasn't more done with Conway's military past? It was heavily hinted at that he had a troubled past in the army which they never revealed. Since I was expecting a profound revelation with big significance in the election, it ended up just fizzling into insignificance, and a lack of development made him no more than a scarred soldier cliché. Although Frank being the leak caught me by surprise, I didn't find it really plausible that he planned his downfall since Elysian Fields for two reasons. One, in previous seasons, the audience would be kept in the loop whilst Frank planned his next moves, which meant we could really appreciate his scheming. This is something they took for granted in Season 5, since it comes across as a sudden plot twist out of nowhere, rather than a result of his meticulous planning. 2, His change of opinion that power lies in the private sector where the money is doesn't seem to be completely consistent with his previous expressed views.
He chose money over power. In this town, a mistake nearly everyone makes. Money is the McMansion in Sarasota that starts falling apart after 10 years. Power is the old stone building that stands for centuries. I cannot respect someone who doesn't see the difference.
Although it can be argued that Elysian Fields and Jane Davis showed him otherwise, and it would also explain his careless behavior with both Walker and Romero before his resignation, it still doesn't make sense to me, because if he had accepted he could no longer be president and that power lied in the private sector, why did he have to push Kathy Durant down the stairs? It seemed to be very reckless, especially since it could be tied to him when he's already suspected of having done the same to Zoe by Tom Hammerschmidt. In this season, Frank doesn't seem to be as cunning because of his recklessness, and therefore you can no longer appreciate his Machiavellian nature. Finally, even though it was very awesome how Claire progressively broke the wall in season 5, her last line wasn't as powerful as it could have been, so it ultimately felt kind of flat for me. Season 5 was still very entertaining, but it certainly had its problems. In fact, if I hadn't thought about it as much in preparation for this video, I probably would have ignored these flaws, particularly since my initial opinion was higher. That's why I'm gonna give season 5 a 7, but overall House of Cards is at an 8 or 9. Knowing the way things work in House of Cards and the character traits of Frank Underwood, this is by no means over.
I will not cease! I will never cease!
This is hinted at in season 5 with the reenactment story of Frank Underwood's grandfather, where he was thought to be dead and left for dead, but eventually comes back. And even though Claire metaphorically left him for dead by not pardoning him, I'm quite sure that we could expect in the next season for Frank to either get pardoned or to destroy her presidency. Ultimately, I think that Frank Underwood is going to die, and potentially Claire will as well. However, I do hope it ends rather than later, because very much like Frank Underwood, I'm concerned by his legacy, and therefore the legacy of the show.
Legacy and infamy are not the same thing.
Because season 5 in particular has shown some signs of deterioration, so it would be a shame for it to continue to do so. Well guys, thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please subscribe, because everyone needs a break.